Hello everyone, I'm Professor Mark Baines at Concordia University, and we're going over some key concepts from weeks 1 through 5 to make sure there's some clarity for information that you need to know going forward, both with the class and with training in general. Starting right off the bat with the basic concepts of clarity between work, rest, and intensity related to force output, RPE, heart rate, or VO2 max. First and foremost, we have to always identify our, or at least our primary purpose is force output. We've got to be clear about what force output we're expecting. And once we know that, we can figure out what's appropriate for the work period and the rest period. So we're really starting with intensity and then looking at work and rest. Kind of generally speaking, in that order is probably a fair way of looking at it. That said, if the expectation of force output is 90, 95, 100% force output, especially 95 to 100% force output, we're looking at work periods of roughly 1 to 10 seconds. You could argue maybe 15 seconds. 20 seconds and expecting 95% force output is probably a little bit too much to expect unless you're talking about a high-level elite type athlete. That said, could be, okay? Certainly as you go closer to more 20 seconds and beyond, then you start seeing force output drop down. So you're looking at, if you're looking at your goal is about 80, 85 to 90, 95% spread somewhere in there. All right, we're 15, 20 seconds-ish, closing up to about 60, 90 seconds worth. 90 seconds probably pressing a little bit high for anything that's more than about 80, 85% force output, but you'll find out from the experience with working with your athletes, but it's highly unlikely they're going to see anything above about 80% once they pursue time periods of work at all efforts over about a minute or longer, give or take. And then you start going into endurance type work where it's 70% of force output or under, probably more likely 60, 65% force output. I've thrown numbers around at you before. It's difficult. There's no exact number here, but to be really clear, if you took Usain Bolt's 100-meter best time of 9.58 seconds for 100 meters, which is insane, and you multiplied it by 32, so if he could somehow do that 32 times in a row without a break and run his 2-mile at that pace, he'd run a 2-mile only a few seconds over 5 minutes. Okay, well, the world record's actually 2 seconds-ish under 8 minutes. So he'd run the world record 2-miler. He'd lap him a couple, 2, 3 times. Okay, easily. Which would be ridiculous, of course. The world record holder is 7:58, which, by the way, is about 35%-ish, pretty close to it, slower than that 9.58 100-meter dash. Someone who's running a basically 7:58 2-mile is running about 14 seconds or so every 100-meter dash, every 100 meters, under 15 seconds. Okay, over 14 seconds, under 15 seconds. That's a loss of a few seconds over 100 meters if they have that pace, which is a 60-65% force output relatively to that 100-meter run of 9.58 seconds for Usain Bolt, right? So we have some general ideas then with work. Rest. Well, if you expect to see 95 to 100% intensity, you better be expecting at least 3 minutes or longer rest. If you go more and more sets, 3, 4, 5, 6 sets, minimum 3 sets, 3 minutes, might be even 5 minutes. I've found in most cases with most athletes, you might be able to rest a 2-minute-ish to 3-minute-ish after the first set and repeat your second set at really close to your level of effort in your first one. Only reason why your second effort would be higher than your first effort would be because if you haven't properly warmed up yet, if you're still kind of warming up. But that shouldn't happen. You're looking at probably ideal world, keeping it about the same or very slightly better. Slightly better is one thing. Your second effort is significantly greater than your first effort. You're still warming up. That's what's going on right now. In which case, you better be sure that's what you want to see out of your athletes. That said, we want to see them be able to repeat that at least 4 times in most situations where we have repeat sets. If they can't do that, they're probably not ready for repeating this level of effort. It's actually too much, so lower the level of expectation of intensity, possibly increase the rest, and then perform more sets. So perform a higher level or a lower level workout for the day, and maybe try this again on a different day, if that's the case. But that said, intensity, we're always talking about force output first. Then RPE, hopefully, perfect world, is less than the force output intensity. So if you're giving 95, 100% force output, maybe it only feels like a level 8, at least the first set. Shouldn't feel like level 10 your first set. If it does, your next sets are going to be worse. You shouldn't feel like your first effort is everything I had, man. There's nothing left in there. That'd be ridiculous. If that truly is what it felt like, you will have nothing left for repetitive sets. That makes no sense. We've got to rethink that mentality we often have with our training. Heart rate, perfect world, the athlete has a lower heart rate. We'll get into why that might be. Lower heart rate despite high levels of force output. And RPE is probably lower as well. Perfect world. Nothing wrong with the heart rate going up, just like there's nothing wrong with the RPE going up. But you got to understand, the higher you see the heart rate, the higher you see the RPE, the more the expectation has to be the person's not going to be able to maintain this level of actual output much longer, if at all. Maybe every successive effort now it's going to be less. That's probably not the goal. And of course, VO2 max shouldn't really, honestly, shouldn't really be discussed in talking about speed work, agility work, strength work, or even glycolytic type work. Because your VO2 max pace was what we're really talking about when we're saying percent VO2 max, not just in relative to heart rate for endurance type work, but anything like glycolytic work or speed work. Oh, your VO2 max would be 150, 200, 300%, 400%. VO2 max would be something insane because your pace is going to be so much faster over a very short burst of work, a short time of work, versus something that's endurance work for 10 to 12 minutes, which is a typical VO2 max test, with how fast you can run over a 10 to 12 minutes, right? At my best, I was running a little over 2 miles in that 10 to 12 minute time. 12 minutes is a Cooper test. And I was basically running a little over 2 miles, a couple extra laps on top of that for that 12-minute time frame. It was my best as a middle distance type athlete. And yet my fastest 100-meter dash was 11.4. Well, I didn't run on sub 46 second 400. Wish I did, which is what it would be if I could repeat that 11.4 times 4, let alone repeat it times 32, which is certainly, or even more than that for 3 miles if I was going for trying to make it in 12 times I go on 12 laps, right? That said, it's not going to be possible. VO2 max effort may be high, output is not necessarily high. Don't equate VO2 max with force output. To some extent, maybe RPE, yeah, but only in endurance activities. Wouldn't actually even refer to VO2 max as a factor specifically in the activity unless we're talking about endurance type work, okay? Not that it'd be wrong, but it's much more appropriate. Increased heart rate, as we said, never the goal. What you're really looking for is improved stroke volume. Stroke volume will not improve unless you've spent significant time at lower intensities first, which means somewhere around 40% VO2 max, which is about where a deconditioned individual will see a cease of increase of stroke volume during activity, and consequently the heart rate starts to rise, which is not a good thing. You're going to become less and less efficient the more that happens. So the goal long term is to see an increased stroke volume and a lowering of heart rate over the same intensity, or as intensity increases, heart rate doesn't increase as much relative to the increase in intensity or force output. That's the goal over time. So in order to do that, stroke volume must improve. And stroke volume can improve up to 100% VO2 max, but stroke volume does not improve basically repetitively over time at every level effort. It doesn't work that way. It taps out somewhere around 100% of VO2 max. Okay, so generally speaking, we're not going to improve it forever. Otherwise, we'd see someone not have their heart rate ever rise if they're well conditioned. That's just not true. So if we want to train that, not just train the VO2 max, not just train improve stroke volume and try to keep the heart rate lower, but also to remove lactate, more specifically to remove excess hydrogen ions that build up in the muscles, in the blood, relative to replenishing ATP and trying to remove waste products at the same time. Those excess hydrogen ions get in the way at the binding sites, the troponin sites on the muscle fibers, consequently blocking muscular contraction, which is why when you feel that burning sensation, it's time for you to take a break. Your body's telling you to take a break. You're actually losing force production right now, and that's not the goal. So despite what we've been taught, take a break. Take a rest period. Okay, and that said, that venous pooling removal, the heaviness you feel, the bloating, that's fine during a training session. It's a normal response to fairly heavy training, but it should not be the case after your rest period, and it definitely should not be the case after your cool down period at all. And of course, the highest level of cortisol level reduction for removing chronic fatigue related problems, for helping remove cortisol relative to higher intensity sessions or anything that's stressful, you're going to have cortisol secretion. Okay, anything. Okay, to remove that or reduce it more than you could at rest, is to work at periods about 30 to 40% VO2 max relative to roughly, this is endurance step what we're talking about, relatively to 55-65% of max heart rate. Okay, not more than that. It's okay if your heart didn't get that high, but don't let it go higher than that. And of course, we're talking about the improvements of VO2 max aerobic capacity type work that improves your stroke volume, increasing and going higher. Particularly, we're starting to see some more significant aerobic improvement in that 40 to 60% VO2 max level, which is roughly 65-75% max heart rate. Not exact, but it's a fair number. And we'll see more significant change in skeletal muscle adaptation to those kinds of stressors in those work periods as well. And to be really clear, endurance should be a component of things you do in some capacity, not just for endurance athletes, but anyone who's engaged in a sport that has work periods that are followed by rest periods that do not allow for more than about a minute rest and that could go on for several minutes or more. So if your sport can go on for several minutes or more and the rest period is never longer than 30, 60 seconds and it goes for several minutes or more, you're definitely going to have an element of glycolytic type need for glycolytic intervals, for some high intensity intervals from time to time, but you're also, the longer that goes on, and the more you have certain athletes that are on the field for several minutes and beyond, aerobic requirements are going to be higher and higher and higher the longer they stay at play, despite having some minor breaks here and there. Football players, fighters, wrestlers, basically soccer players, volleyball players, basketball players, all of them have a need for at least some aerobic type work. Even baseball players, if you're a pitcher, right, you're on the mound, you're playing quite a bit of the game relative to a lot of other players, and relative to how the game goes. Maybe someone's getting the ball hit to them all the time. Well, they're going to have greater and greater need for aerobic response. And unfortunately, we've all been there in situations to play softball or baseball where one kid or one athlete sees the ball keeps coming right at them repetitively. Well, guess what they're going to have a greater and greater need for? Aerobic level response, not just that ATP-CP, unless they're getting that 3 minutes between every time the ball's hit to them, right? Which is repetitively not going to be the case in some situations. Now, that said, in getting you ready for activity, the warm-up itself, the whole goal, when I've asked you the goal, what's the goal of a warm-up, is to increase muscle force production and work capacity, the ability to produce more force and do it for longer. And that'll happen if you perform the right movements at the right speeds, at the right intensities, gradually building from somewhere around 20-30% max force output, going up to the level of force output that's required by your day. It's a power day. Well, the warm-up's got to finish by putting you at that 90, 95, 100% max force output by the time you end your warm-up, before you begin your first set. If the goal is more towards your glycolytic intervals or hypertrophy, or not top strength but near maximal strength, well, somewhere in that 75, the 90, 95% max force output is your goal, somewhere in there. Then so we've got to build that point to that point within the warm-up period, by the end of the warm-up period. And then the cool down is exactly the opposite. And of course, for aerobic work, we're really looking at not more than 60-70% max force output requirement, maybe less than that even, for the end of your warm-up period. Cool down, trying to find an efficient return to homeostasis. So we want to see the body go back down to a normalized heart rate, to go back down to where the muscles feel relaxed, removing that venous pooling, removing all the excess hydrogen ions, and getting you ready to go on with the rest of your day and your life. And for that to happen, you have to find the right work period, which we'll talk about in a moment here. And we got to make sure the body gets back down to about 20-30% max force output, basically the force output required for moving around doing very, very light-like things. And certainly should not have someone breathing hard at all in the cool down at any time, and they shouldn't be breathing hard in the warm up unless the goal is more glycolytic type work, or more high-level force output near the end of the warm up. We say breathing hard, it's still got to be controlled. Ventilatory threshold wise, if they can't control their breathing, they've gone anaerobic, they've exceeded their ventilatory threshold. You don't improve the ventilatory threshold by exceeding it. You have to you stay within it to improve it. Something we have to really think about too. We're so bent on, I almost said the other word, right? So bent on trying to get ourselves to the point where we improve the ability to breathe well by breathing really, really hard. No, you have to be able to control your breathing to improve your ability to breathe, okay? That said, high heat, immunity, or a goal of power, maximal speed, agility, maximal strength. We're talking warm up and cool down, ideally being 5 minutes or less. 3 to 5 minutes is probably about the most ideal because we don't want to fatigue the athlete. Okay, we don't want to go more than that. You certainly can, but there's the risk of fatiguing your athlete. Normal warm up and cool down, we're talking about typically 10 to 15 minutes in most activities. However, you certainly can go longer than that for a warm up or cool down if if it's extremely cold, first of all, or we're talking about someone who's deconditioned significantly, or they have very low motor control and we need more time. It's just that simple, okay? Just to make sure you don't fatigue your athletes. Motor control, coordination, movement skill in general, which is the key before we worry about anything else. We've got to move well first before you worry about how long you work, how hard you work, and how much rest you have. Let's just move well first, which should be performed for long periods, meaning for longer sets, preferably a minute plus in time, give or take. If you can't do the work this particular movement for 30 seconds even, this is so far beyond your current capacity for anything that can be related to motor skill, you shouldn't probably be doing it. If you can't perform this work for a minute or longer, whatever this is we're doing right now, walking or running or jumping jacks or push-ups, or I don't care what you're doing, whatever it is, it's not at the level of motor skill development if they can't maintain it for minutes at a time. So make sure that they rework on that appropriately in readiness as either part of the warm-up, or if they're well beyond that, their motor skill is so high, we're not worried about that. But for the majority of our athletes, we are worried about that, at least at some points in the general year of training, let alone oftentimes in the warm-up itself. Right? You've got to fire the right muscle fibers in the right sequence at the right time. That is not easy. Getting those type 1 muscle fibers to fire, then engage in the type 2A if necessary for high levels of force production, and for that 75 to 90% plus force production, typically more type 2A muscle fibers. And of course, for 90% plus maximal force production, we're definitely needing those type 2X muscle fibers. Some people still say type 2B, but really it's referred to as type 2X. And to engage them, we're going to have to be basically to increase that force production, of course, to a much higher level to get them to fire. But it should happen very, very slowly, and motor skill must be there. If motor skill or recruit motor development is lost, coordination is lost, then there's no point trying to go with that level of intensity. Okay? And it takes years to develop, really, definitely months. You can see some improvement in minutes, but that's not going to be lasting. The lasting stuff, you're going to see more gradual improvements over months and years. GTOs, Golgi tendon organs, they regulate tension and a change in tension, and that says that's actually wrong. My mistake on there. It doesn't cause muscle contraction. It causes the muscle to relax. The GTO, the Golgi tendon organ, overrides the muscle spindles when there's too much tension. Tension comes too fast, causes the muscle to relax. Hey, scratch that out there and say muscle to relax. So it will only do that if the contraction is so high, it won't give you a choice. It'll cause the muscle to relax, and you'll get hurt if you keep trying to contract because you can't. GTO says don't do that. Don't do that. Okay. Or if you're paying attention, then you may be able to re-engage in a few seconds here or a minute or so and recover, come back again and try to get proper movement skill down again, maybe warm up a little bit more, whatever you need to do, and come back and try it again. It might work if you build that development of that power or that strength or force production more slowly. That's one of the key factors. If you find that you get that GTO causing the muscle fibers to shut down, you're probably getting it too fast, or the force requirement itself is too high. So pick a lighter load or lighter force requirement, or do it more slowly. One of the two. Okay. And the muscle spindles regulate length and the change in length, and they cause the muscle to contract, not relax. Once again, cross that out. That's incorrect. Okay. My mistake once again. But that said, the muscle spindles cause the muscle contract, that myotatic or stretch reflex. When you stretch really lightly, you start to feel a little pull. It's a really hard pull if you move too fast or develop too much tension way too quick, or you develop too much length, way too quickly or too hard. Consequently, you're going to see that muscle contract really, really hard against you, trying to protect you. Aesthetic stretch uses autogenic inhibition, trying to get that muscle spindle to contract very, very lightly, and after about 20-30 seconds time or so, some will say 10 seconds, but 20-30 seconds is a safe time frame to get that muscle spindle to be gradually overridden by the GTO so we can achieve a new length and repeat and go back and do it again, repeating it several times. The ideal time for static stretching is whenever you need the benefit. Okay? Static stretching can be done at the beginning of your training session. Yep. It can be done at the end. Most people say the end, which is fair. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with doing it first. If the goal is a greater need for movement, for get rid of stiffness, tightness, nothing wrong with doing static stretching. If you can do it without doing static stretching, so be it. But there's nothing wrong with doing static stretching. And people who say that you're reducing force production by doing static stretching don't understand the research, in that we're talking about only when the static stretch is held excessively long, 45, 60 seconds or longer, or forced forced far too hard into autogenic inhibition can cause problems. But doing some static stretching first is not going to hurt you as long as you follow it, the proper dynamic activity. And dynamic activity, movement, controlled motions, aids flexibility and control by when you move one way, the antagonists on the opposing muscle side, so if you really simply, you get the biceps to do their work, biceps being the agonist, the antagonist, the triceps, must relax. Reciprocal inhibition gets flexibility toward the antagonist. Okay? And that's static or dynamic stretching. Prolonged activity, though, is relative. When you say prolonged, your textbook kind of leads you to thinking more about prolonged activity, maybe 20 minutes or like hour or more. And it depends on the person. If you don't do anything, prolonged activity is 2 minutes. So make sure you understand when we say prolonged activity, we're talking about whoever it is we're talking about, whoever's needs we're referring to. For me, at this moment, had been kind of worn down this last week. Prolonged activity, be doing something that's 20 minutes or longer. I probably shouldn't be doing 20 minutes or longer activity unless that percent VO2 max is probably somewhere around 40% VO2 max right now, at least for the next few days, maybe a week or so, to recover a little bit before I start getting back into more challenging activity. You got to take that into account, how they're doing right now, before you worry about they got to be this long. Well, it depends on, yes, the goals of long-term performance, but also their ability in that given day. Okay. Testosterone decreases after about an intense hour of exercise. So for our maximal strength goals, maximal speed, maximal power, agility type work, you're trying to get at 95, 100% max force output, work, rest, work, rest, work, rest, not including warm up and cool down. You better keep the bulk of that training session under an hour, maybe well under an hour, to make sure you're not losing testosterone, because if you start losing testosterone, you start losing that growth hormone type response, you start losing that insulin-like growth factor response, you start losing a lot of hormonal responses you're going to be needing as far as hormonal balance and general response towards better function for performing at those higher levels of output. If your goal is not that max force output, you're looking at glycolytic type work, and you can go for longer. And if you're doing endurance work, you're not worried about maximization of testosterone, okay? Then we're not worried about that so much. But if the goal is any of the things I just mentioned right there, you better keep that training session under an hour, okay? Stored glycogen is stored in liver and muscles if you eat complex, lower glycemic index carbohydrates on enough basis so you even have it in the first place. There are some people who have you believe you can take in sugar and make it into stored glycogen. Your body doesn't do that. It doesn't take a bunch of simple carbohydrates and find a way to make it into glycogen and store it for later. It doesn't work like that. At least not to any significant extent, that's for sure. So consequently, if you want to have any significant glycogen, then you better make sure you eat plenty of complex, low glycemic index carbohydrates if you're going to be doing any long-term activity or more specifically any higher intensity type activity, which is most of the stuff we do in sports. One of the two of those, isn't it? So consequently, you're going to need that carb. That said, it's going to give you energy about 60 to 90 minutes of activity, which some of you wrote down on your exam, 3 hours or more. If you're going high intensity, you're going to burn through your glycogen in about an hour, hour and a half. You're not going to take you 3 hours. No one's that good. Your book will talk about at moderate levels of activity or lower, you might take several hours before your glycogen stores are depleted. Sure, but for higher intensity activity, we start looking at 70% plus VO2 max type activity. It's going to be gone in 60 to 90 minutes for most individuals, or at least so far gone that you're going to see a decrease in performance if you're not taking in carbohydrate, which means every 15, 20 minutes during such activity, 6 to 8 ounces-ish of that 6 to 8% carb solution to water like Gatorade during activity. But never exercise with general fatigue or a fever. If you're really worn down or you have a fever, don't work out. Just don't train, okay? If you're not sure if it's general fatigue or it's a little bit tired, give it a shot. And you'll find out pretty quickly, but do it at low levels of effort, recovery type level effort. If you're fatigued, that 40% VO2 max range, give yourself a reasonable warm-up. At the end of your 10, 15 minute-ish normal type warm-up, I wouldn't consider doing a all-out speed power type day. If you're feeling kind of it's not going to happen, okay? You might get near, but you're not going to get that maximal force output day. Be clear about what your goals are before you start trying to force yourself into the category that you feel like you're supposed to be today versus what you're really ready for in that given day. Frustrating, yes, but you have to be taking into account what the body can do today, not just what we want it to do. But fever, never, for sure. But a little bit tired, just make your warm up a little bit longer maybe and see if maybe that helps with the training session for the day. But don't start higher than that 20-30% VO2 max, really low level type output, and build up slowly and see how you're feeling over the course of that warm-up period. Then you'll probably know pretty quickly based on your output, let alone your RPE, if you're ready for that day. And the more you take into account your heart rate and your RPE on a regular basis, you'll know your heart rate's higher than normal, RPE is higher than normal with a lower performance output. Maybe skip the day. Max heart rate formula for 18 to 39-year-olds, 220 minus your age is fair. That's your max heart rate, okay? Theoretically, of course. However, this needs to be understood. The goal is never to get to the max heart rate. The more you get closer to your max heart rate, the more you increase the probability of death. That's what max heart rate is, isn't it? That's the maximum beats your heart can beat. So clearly it's not the goal. And, when elite athletes talk about their workouts, when you see them online, what they do, and they're going nuts, breathing hard, their coordination, first of all, their motor skill is off. Now, they look better than most human beings, the large majority of human beings, because they're elite athletes, but their actual coordination is way down doing these crazy workouts that I don't think someone's really thought through very efficiently, very clearly. They just want to do hard work. We're better than that. And they start forcing the issue, and their heart rate's through the roof. The heart rate's through the roof, performance is down. That is not the goal. If you're trying to get a psychological benefit of trying to train someone into, hey, you can train even when you're not feeling good, you can still do it. Okay, I get it, but you got to be clear. If a person's not going to be a state champ or a national champion or conference champion or a world-class athlete, we really don't have any business trying to take someone to that level. You just don't. Okay, you're putting someone under far too much danger that it's not worth. And I know I've said it in a previous video before. Hopefully you recall it, because it's a huge thing to be thinking about when they pulled 1996 Olympians. If you recall this, 300 of them randomly, and asked them all the same question. If you'd be guaranteed gold medal, but there'd be a 50% chance you would die, will you take it? 300 for 300 said yes, which is why we don't follow the advice of elite athletes when it comes to higher intensity activity. Okay, we don't. No, we do what fits us. Now, if they say that, hey, then you follow what they say. You say, this is what you do, and this is what I did. Don't do it unless you're already at the level they are, and you want to see if you can handle it then. Otherwise, I wouldn't do it. Believe me, I've been there. And that said, for the younger athletes, the 7 to 17-year-olds or 40 years and above, me now, we're talking about a formula being a little more accurate, being 208 minus 0.7 times your age. So for a 50-year-old, take 0.7 times 50, which is 35. You take that from 208, so you end up with basically just a little over 170, right? You're talking about that person being, their heart rate's going to be a little different than it would be with the max heart rate formula for 18 to 39-year-old. Keep in mind, though, honestly, perfect world, I mean, not perfect world, but real world, I don't care what formula you use. Either way, I think we're overstating what really the needs are, because we don't want to be anywhere near the max heart rate. And we're not even trying to get the heart rate up. We just want to be clear about what these heart rate indicators are telling us. That's what we want to do, not try to get the heart rate to a certain point, right? Altitude. Oh, a lot of people miss this question. To get measurable and performance benefits. Let's be clear. Measurable performance benefits for endurance athletes. If you are a speed or power athlete, you got no business training at altitude. It's not going to help you, okay? Unless you're going to be in the Mexico City Games like 1968. You want to be doing some work up there, because you got to be able to at least perform similarly to that. But then we talk about acclimation for that. Don't train that way during the year. You get super strong, super fast, and you come up for about a couple weeks before your major event and get used to it a little bit, training in that and working in that level. But you don't train for months at a time like that for a power athlete. That makes no sense. A lot of fighters and wrestlers oftentimes do this, and they're glycolytic type athletes. There's somewhat endurance benefits, but they're not going to gain significant benefit over their compatriots by doing this type of work. It's so overdone for these athletes, if you ask my professional opinion. I just think it's highly unnecessary and highly intrusive, or I'm sorry, highly detrimental to these athletes to be doing this. You're looking for a performance benefit that's going to get you about 1 to 4% difference. Not a lot, not much. That's it. Okay, so if you're not already going to be an elite champion, or you're trying to get the edge over the person you're just not quite as good as, or you're not sure if you're going to be able to beat that one person or that one team or whatnot, then maybe you do this type of work. Otherwise, don't do it. Okay, and you're looking about ideally to get much benefit from this. To get that 1 to 4% performance benefit for an endurance type athlete, 6,000 plus feet you got to live at. You got to train at more near sea level, and you got to do it for 21 days like this at the very least, if not more, and you're going to lose it in a matter of a few days after you return back to normal sea level. Okay, you're going to lose performance benefit. You don't lose all the red blood cells. You actually benefit yourself with that kind of training, but you're going to see ultimately that you're going to only find improvement for a short period of time to see significant performance benefit. Heart rate variability, ideally, is high at rest and low during activity. Now, what we're really saying is, high condition athlete, their heart rate's actually low, with a lot of variable time between beats at rest, and they start working out, heart rates become much more normalized. Their heart rate's 140 versus the unfit person also at 140, but the conditioned athlete has the same metronomic timing between beats at 140, whereas the unfit athlete, heart is jumping all over the place, having a hard time adapting to stress. Okay, how do we get there? Starting low VO2 max level work and building slowly upward, not starting with high intensity intervals. That's going to do the exact opposite for us. Ventilation, voluntary versus involuntary. Well, you're as you work at higher rates, it becomes more and more involuntary, doesn't it? And when you can control your breathing, when it's voluntary, you're doing aerobic level work. When you're doing anaerobic conditioning type work, you're going to see it become involuntary. And as you do that, you have to understand your performance is either going down now already, or it's going to be going down soon. So you got to be clear that that is your goal. If you actually want to improve your ventilatory threshold, improve your aerobic capacity, you have to do more work below the point where you're breathing hard, not above it. The book even talks about how you can improve aerobic capacity with doing high intensity intervals. Yes, but you're going to find more benefits for improving your aerobic level capacity by doing more moderate level activity, not high level activity. Okay, you're going to get that only once you're going to get more benefit to your aerobic capacity once you've maximized or at least highly utilized moderate activity. Then bring in the high intensity activity. Now we see some huge performance benefits. No question about it. And then lastly, anaerobic threshold and lactate threshold do not necessarily occur at the same time. Okay, technically, your onset of blood lactate accumulation and lactate building to a high level, not lactic acid, lactate. Okay, it building to a significant level. You'll start to see maybe some small change in motor control or facial expression. But when it becomes definitely noticeable, we're probably approaching more toward our lactate threshold. The anaerobic threshold typically occurs after the lactate threshold. It's not the exact same point. It kind of is a point of upset for me with a lot of textbooks referring to it only as lactate threshold, when technically lactate threshold occurs before the AT, the anaerobic threshold. Okay, that said, they're referred to as the same. They're not exactly the same. How do we improve them? Well, by training just below them. Not training above them, training just below them. How do we figure them out? Well, we got to figure out how much work you can handle for more moderate activities for long periods of time with short rest. And then when you see that improve with similar heart rates, then we're starting to see improvement in anaerobic threshold, okay, or the lactate threshold if you want to think of it that way. Lactate threshold clearly you have to take by taking blood, but anaerobic threshold we're going to see improvements when you can see your performance improving with short rest periods and moderate work periods at high intensities. By short rest periods, we're talking about 30 to 90 seconds. By moderate work periods, we're talking 20 to 60 seconds-ish. Could be as long as 2 minutes, but really 20 to 60 seconds is a more of an appropriate high-intensity interval type period for getting that 80-85% force output and above. Okay, and of course, our rest period can't be more than about 90 seconds if we're expecting to get that level force output and showing any real signs of adaptation to it. The heart rate should not be rising significantly either. That takes time. It takes effort. It's a lot of stuff here. It's something you probably have to go over and over a lot and really be careful with how you refine these characteristics of our training program to be able to get more out of our athletes. But they're important points that are going to show up on future exams, and they're going to show up for you in your coaching. So I hope you take these lessons well and hopefully build upon these concepts, realizing we're just barely touching on this stuff. There's always more. Look forward to talking to you again soon.